How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tesvav, Daf 15 of Masechta Gittin. Friends. We're starting the second parak of Masechta Gittin today. I didn't finish. Whatever. The interesting thing is Masechta Gittin's been interesting, right? I mean, there aren't so many words on the page. I think they say that in terms of words, I think we're more than halfway through Shas or something. I think we're done a decent chunk of Shas in terms of words. But you see, a Masechta like Masechta Gittin, the pages aren't particularly large, but it requires a lot of explanation, So, we're not going to do that much today in terms of quantity, but some of it you have to think through a shtickle. This Mishnah that we're learning today could play around with your little brain a little bit. So I'll go upon him though. It's going to be nice. We're going to have a good time. Alright, so we're going to start in Daf Tezvav Amud Aleph at the beginning of the second parak of Masechta Gittin. It basically continues talking about B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam, but different configurations of B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam. You can imagine it could potentially get spaghetti-like. Hamevi get Medina Sayom. Okay, fine. Fellow brings a get from Medina Sayom. He's a shaliach. Ve'omar, and he says, B'fanei Nichtam, avalo B'fanei Nechtam. Okay, if you remember from the first mission of the Masechta, the template is thus. Shaliach brings a get from Medina Sayom to Eretz Yisrael. He says, B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam. That's what he does. We're going to see a bunch of different iterations of this. Basically, none of them work. Certainly not as B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam. There's one way that you do it, and the Gemara itself is about the first kasha in the Gemara is the first Mishnah makes it pretty straightforward the way that this works. A shaliach brings a get, Medina Sayom, says B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam. That's it. Don't play games. That's what it is. So now we're going to play shtickle games. Hamevi get Medina Sayom ve'omer B'fanei Nichtav, avalo B'fanei Nechtam. B'fanei Nechtam, avalo B'fanei Nichtav. He says, look, B'fanei Nichtav, that's all I could say. I can't say B'fanei Nechtam. Or I could say B'fanei Nechtam, but I can't say B'fanei Nichtav. Okay. Where am I? B'fanei Nichtav kulo, B'fanei Nechtam chetzio. Right? The ksiva was B'fanei, but in terms of the chasimas, in terms of the signatures, I only saw one of them. B'fanei Nichtav chetzio, B'fanei Nechtam kulo. Or, I saw both of the signatures. Yeah, it was signed in front of me, but in terms of the ksiva, only half of it. In all those cases, possible. Right? The way it works is B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam. If you divert, if you diverge from that, then forget about it. Again. The way that it works is B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam. If you're thinking about playing games, don't play games. Echad omer B'fanei Nichtav, ve'echad omer B'fanei Nechtam. Okay, so what if you have one person says B'fanei Nichtav and the other person says B'fanei Nechtam? So now there's two options over here. One is that only one of them was the actual shaliach and the other one wasn't. Well, then it doesn't work because the shaliach needs to say B'fanei Nichtav, B'fanei Nechtam. The other option is that they were both appointed to be the shaliach, right? There are two shluchims. One of them says B'fanei Nichtav, one of them says B'fanei Nechtam, but still, as we learned about earlier in the Masechta, if you allow one person to say B'fanei Nechtam without saying B'fanei Nichtav, well then you might confuse that with other Kiyum Shtaris, that you might think, you could just use one witness for Kiyum Shtaris. That's why you need the one person saying both, B'fanei Nichtav and B'fanei Nechtam, so that even though, yes, you were having one person testify about the Chasimos in this case, but we pair it together with B'fanei Nichtav to make it clear that it's a different kind of thing. This is not a regular Kiyum Shtaris. But if you have one person saying B'fanei Nichtav and the other person saying B'fanei Nechtam, even if they're both appointed to be shluchim, but it might be confusing because you have one person testifying about the signatures, so you might think that Kiyum Shtaris is only with one signature. So therefore, if one of them says B'fanei Nichtav, if the other one says B'fanei Nechtam, it does not work regardless of if they were both shluchim or if only one of them was a shaliach. In either case, it won't work. Pasul, fine. Shnaim omim B'fanenu Nichtav. If two of them say that B'fanenu Nichtav, okay, ve'echad omer B'fanei Nechtam, and a third person says b'fanei nechtam. So it's a similar thing, right? You're going to have you're having one person testifying about the chasimos. So again, it's not going to work. Apostle. Rabbi Yehuda says that it is kosher, and Rabbi Yehuda says that it is kosher, and Rashi points out that the Gemara points out that he's referring both to the previous case, which is one of them says b'fanei nichtov and the other one says b'fanei nechtam, as well as this case where two of them say b'fanei nichtov and one of them says b'fanei nechtam. In that case, assuming that it's the shaliach who says b'fanei nechtam, so it would be fine, because since it's accompanied by a b'fanei nichtov, even though it's not him who's saying b'fanei nichtov, but since it's accompanied with a testimony, an account of the kesiva, people will not confuse it with kiyum shtaris, and that would work according to Rabbi Yehuda. Echad omer b'fanei nichtov. If one of them says b'fanei nichtov, v'shnayim omer, right? So if the shaliach says b'fanei nichtov, v'shnayim omer b'faneinu nechtam, and two witnesses say b'faneinu nechtam, kosher. It is kosher. And the Gemara says, Rashi says, the Gemara is going to explain it. I must have seen it already, but I assume it's because you have basically, it's just a kiyum shtaris. I think you have two people saying b'fanei nechtam, it's a kiyum shtaris. Fine. So now, as I said a few minutes ago, why do I need this Mishnah b'chlal? We learned at the beginning of the Masechta. Hamevi get medina sayom tzarich sheyomar b'fanei nichtov b'fanei nechtam. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the first Mishnah of the Masechta makes it pretty clear what needs to happen. A fellow brings a get from Medina Sayom. He says b'fanei nichtov u'b'fanei nechtam. And if he's not saying b'fanei nichtov u'b'fanei nechtam, forget about it. No b'fanei nichtov aval lo b'fanei nechtam. No lo b'fanei nechtam aval lo b'fanei nichtov. No b'fanei nichtov kulo b'fanei nechtam chetzio. No playing games. B'fanei nichtov b'fanei nechtam. That's it. So why do I need this Mishnah at all? I keep on losing my place because I keep on looking up for my Gemara in order to move around my hands and explain things. Alright. So, if I would only have the first Mishnah of the Masechta Havamina, I would think, Tzarich v'lo amar kosher. I might think, look, you have to say b'fanei nichtov b'fanei nechtam. What if you didn't? Okay, Beseder, it's fine. Kamash Malan, then no. We mean business over here. You say b'fanei nichtov b'fanei nechtam. If you don't, it's possible. What does it mean it's possible? I assume what that means is that you shouldn't get married using that get until, meaning it's coming from Medina Sayam, from far away, and if nobody says b'fanei nichtov b'fanei nechtam, so you have a document. How do you know it's valid? I assume what it means is that before she can use it to get remarried, she would have to validate it, but do a kiyum shtaris. But we did learn a few days ago. I can't really say a few weeks ago because we're only 2 weeks into the Masechta, but we did say at one point that if she did get remarried nonetheless, I think we said that it would be okay, because really the problem is only if the Baal is ma'arer, and if he's not ma'arer, so if she already got remarried, so we'll leave her alone. But I guess maybe the point is that we don't rely upon it to get remarried. You have to say b'fanei nichtov b'fanei nechtam, and if you don't, well then we can't rely upon it to be a valid document until it gets validated. Fine. I don't know, that's how I'm understanding it. Anybody else have other ideas? Fine. Hey chet, okay. B'fanei nichtov chetzo, b'fanei nechtam kulo apostle. So we said, if half of it was written in front of me, and I saw both signatures, that's good, right? B'fanei nechtam, I saw the signatures. In terms of the ksiva, I only saw half of it. Hey chetzio, which half? Ilem chetzio rishon. If we're saying that he only saw the first half of it being written, and we're saying that doesn't work. But we saw Rabbi Elazar the other day, that even if there was only, even if he only saw the first line of the get written lishma, that's enough. So why should he have to see the whole first half? So no, it means the second half of the get. If the second half of the get, he only saw the second half of the get, not the first half of the get, so we say that is possible, right? So even if he saw both signatures, but only saw the second half of the get being written, that doesn't work. Fine, friends. Oh, is somebody here? So friends, now you have to take out your brains a little bit. I'm not sure how much. A little bit. I think with Masechta Gittin, it just requires explaining, So I think we're gonna have to do a little bit of explaining for the next chunk, and then after the next chunk, we're done with the daf. Okay, but I don't know how long it's going to take. B'fanei nichtov kulo u'b'fanei nechtam chetzio apostle. So the Mishnah had said that if the shaliach comes and he says, look, b'fanei nichtov kulo. I saw the entire thing being written, but in terms of the chasimis, I only saw one of the signatures being signed. The other one, I didn't see. So now we say it's possible, right? Because again, you have to say b'fanei nichtov, b'fanei nechtom, not b'fanei nichtov kulo, b'fanei nechtom chetzio. No, that doesn't work. Now, here we go. Omer Rav Chizde says Rav Chizde, va'afilu shnayim mi'idim al chasimas yad sheni posel. Do you hear that? Friends, you heard that, right? That if the shaliach says, B'fonai nichtov, okay, great. And he says, and I saw one of the signatures being signed, I didn't see the other signature. And Rav Chizda says, guess what? Even if two witnesses who recognize the second signature come and say, oh yeah, we testify about, yeah, that's a valid signature, still it doesn't work. Meaning, if you would have this shaliach say b'fanei nichtov, b'fanei nechtom, it would work. But if he says b'fanei nichtov kulo, b'fanei nechtom chetzio, and then two witnesses come to testify about the second signature, I would think that all of our bases are covered, right? The shaliach is saying b'fanei nichtov, great. He's saying b'fanei nechtom 50%. The other 50% we fill it in with two witnesses. Of course, we should believe two witnesses. So I would think that all my bases are covered. Says Rav Chizda nisht. Rav Chizda says no way, no how. Oh, cool, my time, how come? Oh, kulo. I keep on losing my place. My time, how come? Oh, kulo b'kiyum aget. Oh, kulo b'takonas chacham. Rav Chizda says because we're not mixing and matching. What? We're not mixing and matching over here. Either you do the b'fanei nichtov thing, or you do a proper kiyum shtaros with both witnesses, meaning sign about both signatures. Again, we're not playing games over here. We're not saying, look, I could do b'fanei nichtov kulo, I could do the whole nichtov, the whole ksiva, and half of the chasima, I just need to find two witnesses for the other signature. There's no games over here. Either you have a shaliach who's saying b'fanei nichtov, b'fanei nechtom, or you do a proper kiyum shtaros on both signatures. There's no mixing and matching. That is Rav Chizda's opinion. Now says Rave, Maskif la Rave. Rave says, I don't agree with you, Rav Chizda. Mi'ika, Rav Chizda after was his father-in-law, by the way. Mi'ika midi, does it make any sense? The ilu omer chad kosher hashta di'ika trey posel? Because as we learned in the first parak, this is how Rashi explains it, or at least that's how I understand how Rashi explains it. Yeah, these next two things, right? The Rave is kasha and his teretz. I have to assume that I'm understanding Rashi correctly. It's a little bit subtle, if I understand correctly at least. So we had learned the other day that, right, in the Machlokas Rabbah and Rava, that technically speaking, right, so we say b'fanei nichtov, b'fanei nechtom. But technically speaking, if he used, right, because remember, well, if we remember back a few days ago, right, Rabbah asked the kasha on Rava. Rabbah, who said it's about Lishma, asked the kasha on Rava, who said it's about kiyum shtaris. And Rabbah says to Rava, if it's all about kiyum shtaris, then why do you even have b'fanei nichtov b'chlal? All you really need is b'fanei nechtom. So Rava says, well, if it would only be b'fanei nechtom, you might confuse it with kiyum shtaris in general. To which Rabbah responded, no, so then Rabbah asked him kashas, no, come on, you wouldn't confuse it. To which Rava says that you would confuse it because, after all, if you said Yod'inon, right? Because Rabbah said to Rava, like, you wouldn't confuse it because by kiyum shtaris you say Yodea, right? Yod'inon, Yodin anachnu machsimos Yedeim or something, right? That we know that these are signatures, whereas by get it's b'fanei nechtom, it's not Yod, right? It's not Yod'inon, it's b'fanei. It's b'fanei nechtom rather than Yodea, Yodea ani or Yodinan anu. To which Rava responded, and he says, yes, but technically speaking, if he did say Yodea ani b'chasimas yado edim, it would work, right? So we learned the other day, so Be'etzim, the point is, we learned the other day that even though, yes, the way that you do it is b'fanei nichtov, b'fanei nechtom, technically, if he didn't say b'fanei nechtom, but instead he said Yodea ani b'chasimas yado edim, he used the lashon of kiyum shtaris, it would also work by Gittin. So if you have a shaliach, and he comes, and instead of saying b'fanei nechtom, he says Yodea ani b'chasimas yado edim, he uses the lashon of kiyum shtaris, it would still work. Oh, so that being the case, says Rave, if this guy alone would have said what these two witnesses are coming and saying. What are they saying? Two witnesses are coming about the second signature, and they're saying, Yodea Yadinan Anu Bachasimas Ha'ed, or whatever, right? So now if this guy alone would have said the same thing that two witnesses are now saying, if he would have said that on his own, it would work. So Rava argues it makes no sense to say that what one person on his own could do, two people can't do. Right? So again, so Maskef Rava asks the kasher of Chizdi, says, Mi'ika midi, doesn't make any sense that the ilu Amr Chad kosher, that if the Shaliach alone would have said, Yodea ani b'chasimas yado eid, that I recognize the signature, it would work on his own. Hashadi katrei pasul. And now that there are two people saying the same thing as he would be saying, it's pasul. So Rava says, I don't think so, Rav Chizda. Elo Amar Rava, rather says Rava, afilu hu ve'acher me'idin al chasimas yad sheni pasul my taima osi lechlufe kimshars be'alma v'karnofik nichiriva de mamona apuma de chad saida. This is very interesting. The first time we saw this, I think, apparently was in Masechta Ksubis, that Rava says actually what it's talking about is that so Rava says, look, Rav Chizda, your case would taka be kosher, right? If he says b'fanei nichtav kulo, b'fanei nechtam chetzio, and then he brings two other witnesses to testify about the second signature, Rava says that would be fine. But what would be an issue is if he says b'fanei nichtav kulo, b'fanei nechtam chetzio. So he's saying that the first signature b'fanei nechtam, and in terms of the second signature, he now pairs together with a second person to testify about the second signature. So the second signature he's not testifying about by himself, he's testifying about with another fellow. And technically speaking, it should be kosher, right? Just like Rava asked the kasha on Rav Chizda, he says, look, I don't understand. If the Shaliach would have said, Yodea ani b'chasimas yada edim, it would work. Now that there are two people, it doesn't work. Rava says it makes no sense. And the same logic would apply to Rava's example as well, right? That he's testifying, right? He's saying, b'fanei nechtam chetzio, he's saying b'fanei nechtam about one of the signatures. And in terms of the second signature, He's saying that I recognize the second signature, and he's joining together with another person. So technically speaking, if he alone can do it, so then certainly when he's with another person, it should work. However, the reason why it does not work is not because of get. By get it should be fine, right? He alone can do it. But because of other shtaris, it would be a problem. What would the problem be? The problem would be that 3/4 of the testimony is coming from one person. Right? Rashi points out that there was a case that we saw in Ksubis, that let's say you have two witnesses that are signed on a document, and one of the witnesses died. And now you need to validate the document. So the witness who's alive says, okay, yep, this is my signature. So he's believed. Now, because there are two witnesses signed on the signature, on the document, because there are two signatures on the document, one of them is saying, one of the witnesses who is signed on the document is saying, that's my signature. So he's believed 100% about that signature. So if we say that there's basically two signatures that need to be validated, so he just validated one of them. He just validated 50% of the signatures. Now, if he were to join together with another person to testify about his colleague's signature, about the second signature, that would be a problem. Because he just testified about his signature entirely, so that's 50% of the required testimony. If he testifies also as one of the two witnesses for the second signature, so then that's another 25% of the testimony that we need for these signatures. So 75% of the testimony of about the signatures is coming from one person, and only 25% is coming from another person. And by testimony, it says, right, api shnayim edim, you need two witnesses, i.e., if you divide it up evenly mathematically, so 50% from 50% of the testimony from one witness, 50% of the testimony from the second witness. Now, if you have, so in the case of a document where you have two witnesses signed on it, one of them dies, the witness who's alive testifies about his own signature. If he then joins together with somebody else about the second signature, well then he's testifying about his entire signature, and half of the other one, that's 75% of the testimony coming from one party, that would not work by other documents. Now, when it comes to a get, it would be fine, because just as Rava had argued against Rav Chizda, that if one witness, if the shaliach alone would just say, or even Yodea Ani B'Chasimas Yada Edim, it would work on his own. Certainly if he joins together with somebody else, it should work. But just out of concern for other documents, where this setup where you have one witness testifying about 75% of the testimony would be a problem, so even though by a get it should be okay, because he could just do it all on his own, we're going to say that it is possible out of concern for other shtars. So let's read that inside. Right, so huva acher. So Amar Rava afilu huva acher mi'idan achsimas yad sheni. Even if he and a second person are joining together to testify about the second signature, possible. It's possible. My time how come? Because osi le'echlufe b'kiyum shtars da'alma. Because you might then confuse it with a general kiyum shtars v'kanofik nichi riva de mamona apuma de chatzayda, and you would be extracting 75%. 75% of the testimony that would be extracting money, I guess, would be coming from one witness, and that's not okay. You need 50% of the testimony coming from each witness. Maskif Rav Ashi. But now Rav Ashi, Taka disagrees with Rav, because mi'ika midi dilu masik lei'u lichule dibura kosher hashadika chad bahade pasul. So now Rav Ashi has a problem with Rav's explanation, because Rav, as you yourself said, if he would have done the entire thing just on himself and he didn't bring another person into it, it would be kosher. And now that he brings another person into it to give additional testimony, all of a sudden it becomes a problem. And now it's possible. So Elam Rav Ashi, rather says Rav Ashi, afilu omer ani hu eid sheni possible. So even if he says, I'm the second signature, right? So he says, B'fanei nichtav kulo, b'fanei nechtom chetzio, and then he says, and I'm the second signature. Again, it's not b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtom. He's playing games. He's not saying, he could just say b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtom, but he's saying b'fanei nichtav kulo, b'fanei nechtom chetzio, v'ani hu eida sheni. It doesn't work. My time how come? O kulo b'kiyum aget, o kulo b'takanas chachamim. Look, either you say b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtom, or you do a proper kiyum shtaris with two witnesses. You don't play games with the template. Okay, fine. So we saw three opinions, Rav Chizda, Rava, and Rav Ashi, about these problematic halves, right? Meaning, right, if he says b'fanei nichtav kulo, b'fanei nechtom chetzio, and then Rav Chizda says if there are two witnesses who testify about the second signature. Rava says even if it's him and another witness. Rav Ashi says he says it's my own signature is the second one. In all those cases, it would be possible. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, b'fanei nichtav kulo, b'fanei nechtom chetzio, that if he says that the entire get was written before me, and half of the get was signed before me, right? So b'fanei nichtav kulo was entirely written in front of me, and only one of the signatures was signed in front of me. Possible. It's possible. Okay, fine. Now, what's the deal with the second half? What's the deal with the second signature? If you're going to say, well, the Mishnah is saying that the shaliach comes and he says, look, half of it, he says the whole thing was written in front of me. One of the signatures was signed in front of me. One of the witnesses signed in front of me. And then there's nobody to testify about the second signature. Well, hashta echad. If you continue reading in our Mishnah, the next case is that if one person says it was written in front of me, and the other person says it was signed in front of me, that one witness is testifying about the entire writing of it, and the other witness is testifying about the entire signing of it. Possible, and we say it's possible. Certainly, if the shaliach is only testifying about half of the chasimos, and one of them isn't being validated at all, verified at all, obviously it's not going to work. If you have the shaliach testifying about the entire both signatures, it doesn't work because he didn't say b'fanei nichtav. So now you have the shaliach only testifying about half of the signature. Certainly it doesn't work. So then what's the Mishnah talking about? So the Gemara wants to assume, so it must be talking about where the Shaliach says, Bifonai nichtov kulo, Bifonai nechtom chetzio, and then either like Rave, that he testifies with another person about the second signature, or like Rav Ashi, that he says, and the second signature is my signature, but not like Rav Chizda Rashi says, because Rav Chizda's would be too big of a chiddush, right? Right, meaning if we're saying that there must be some chiddush over here, because to say simply Bifonai nechtom chetzio and there's no testimony at all about the second signature, that's obvious, right? Because we said that if one person says Bifonai nichtav and the other one says Bifonai nechtom, it doesn't work. Certainly if he's only saying Bifonai nechtom chetzio, it doesn't work. So there must be some kind of chiddush over here, but we're gonna get kind of like if we have to choose between a big chiddush or we can have a smaller chiddush, we'll go with the smaller one and not be so dramatic like Rav Chizda, who says that even if two witnesses come and testify about the second signature, it doesn't work. So that's a little bit too dramatic, so we're going to leave out Rav Chizda, but it's either like Rave or like Rav Ashi. Amalach Rav Chizda will respond to you 1 second. I don't agree with your premise. Your premise is that we need a chiddush over here because it already says that if one witness says b'fanei nichtav, if one person says b'fanei nichtav, the other one says b'fanei nechtom, it's possible. And certainly if there's only b'fanei nechtom chetzio, it's going to be possible. But 1 second, if you look at the order of the Mishnah, the first case of the Mishnah is where one person says b'fanei, right? If he says b'fanei nichtav, avalo b'fanei nechtom, that there was no chasim at all, and then it says b'fanei nichtam. B'fanei nichtav, and then b'fanei nechtam kulo, chetzio. Oh gosh, I'm really butchering this, right? Well, let's start over. If he says b'fanei nichtav, aval lo b'fanei nechtam, or vice versa. The next case it says b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtam chetzio. The next case is b'fanei, one of them says b'fanei nichtam, the other one says b'fanei, one of them says b'fanei nichtav, the other one says b'fanei nechtam. So Rav Chizda says, look, you're working backwards, right? You're saying because the third case of the Mishnah is where one of them says b'fanei nichtav and the other one says b'fanei nechtam, so then certainly in the previous case, in the second case, right, that was the third case of the Mishnah. Therefore, in the second case of the Mishnah, where it says b'fanei nechtom chetzio, it's obvious that it's possible. But says Rav Chizda, if you work backwards like that, amalach Rav Chizda l'taimech, if you're working backwards b'fanei nichtav avalo b'fanei nechtom lamali, then why do I need the first case of the Mishnah, where he says b'fanei nichtav avalo b'fanei nechtom? Obviously, that's going to be possible. After all, if he says b'fanei nichtav kulo b'fanei nechtom chetzio, where he saw the entire ksiva and half of the chasima, it doesn't work. So certainly in the first case of the Mishnah, where he only saw the ksiva and didn't see the chasima at all, obviously it's possible. Ela lozo avzo katani hachi achanami lozo avzo katani. No, rather Rav Chizda says, look, you can't work backwards in the Mishnah. Rather, the Mishnah is building on itself. First, the Mishnah says that if you only said b'fanei nichtav and you didn't, right? If it's b'fanei nichtav aval lo b'fanei nechtom, it's possible. And then even if he says b'fanei nichtav u'b'fanei kulo b'fanei nechtom chetzio, it's still possible. And then it says not only that, even if you have one person says b'fanei nichtav, the other one says b'fanei nechtom, where everything was seen but by two separate people, even that it doesn't work. It's building on each other. But you can't, argues Rav Chizda, you can't work backwards to start with b'fanei nichtav, echad omer b'fanei nichtav, ve'echad omer b'fanei nechtam, and say that, well, if that's the case, that it's possible, then certainly if it's b'fanei nechtam chetzio, it's possible, so there must be some kind of a chiddush, and it's not, and you're saying that Rav Chizda, that my idea is too dramatic. You can't work backwards from the Mishnah, you have to work forwards, and therefore your whole premise of like needing to look for a chiddush goes out the window, and therefore Rav Chizda says, look, the way I read it, when it says b'fanei nichtav, kulo b'fanei nechtam chetzio, you could say, but if two separate witnesses testify about the second signature, it still would not be okay. Okay, now this next thing I realized I forgot to review, but it's just 3 lines and I don't think it's hard. So let's see. Amar Rav Chizda says Rav Chizda, Gidud chamisha umechitza chamisha ein mitztarfin. Okay, that if you have for like a rishus on Shabbos, so if you have like a pit that the walls are 5 tfachim tall, and then you have a fence surrounding the pit that's 5 tfachim tall, so it's a total of 10 tfachim, right? And as long as it's 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim in terms of area, and 10 tfachim tall, that would be a separate rishus. But we say ein mitztarfin. Says Rav Chizda, they don't join together, right? The walls of the pit and then the walls built above that do not join together. Ache okulo b'mechitzis, okulo b'gidud. That no, it would either have to be entirely walls or entirely the pit, but not 50% pit, 50% wall. Darsh Meremar, says Meremar, no, actually they can join together the pit and the walls. The halacha is that a taka joins together. Okay, friends, we're going to stop here. That was the beginning of Masechta, of the second parak of Masechta Gittin. It could play with your head a shtickle, all these different configurations. But be'etzem, what we said is that you have to say b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtam. There's no playing games. We then saw three-way machlokas between Rav Chizda, Rava, and Rav Ashi about if he says b'fanei nichtav kulo, b'fanei nechtam chetzio. What about that second signature? Rav Chizda says even if two witnesses testify about that second signature, it doesn't work. Rava says no, come on, that's a little bit too extreme. But if he, together with another witness, testifies about the second signature, it doesn't work, even though it should work by get, but out of concern for other shtaros, where 3/4 of the testimony would then be coming from one party. And Rav Ashi disagrees. He says no. If he could do it on his own, it should be okay if it's with another person too. So rather, says Rav Ashi, even if he says that my signature is the second signature, it still does not work, because either he says b'fanei nichtav, b'fanei nechtam, or you do a proper kiyum shtaros. No mixing and matching. Friends, that was the Aftez Vav of Masechta Gittin. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.